Wendelle Stevens' Insurmountable Evidence by Melissa Osaki, August 23, 2024.
A core principle of the creation energy teaching is to think for oneself. Through the process of thinking and questioning, we also begin to free ourselves from beliefs. We should always refrain from willingly or blindly believing what we are told. Researching and asking questions when something is clearly contradictory is something that Billy himself would advise. If our intention is to rid the planet of beliefs, religion, and sectarian thinking, the process must begin with ourselves. Someone once told me that the truth is stranger than fiction. The more we learn, the truer that becomes. That's not to say that the truth is strange, but our collective lack of understanding of how things work in regards to perception, nature, and the world in general leads to speculation and beliefs. In an effort to make sense of the world around us, we attribute the unimaginable to fantasies, false perceptions, and gods. If we could progress past these troubling times, our planet and the universe hold so much wonder.
Wendelle Stevens and Groom Lake, New Evidence.
In the image at the top of the article, we have an undated shot of the A-12 reconnaissance aircraft sitting on the flight line at Groom Lake in Nevada. The shot would have been captured sometime during the 1960s when the aircraft were at Groom Lake for testing. According to Lockheed Martin, the A-12 was produced from 1962 to 1964 and flew from 1963 to 1968. They were primarily used by the Central Intelligence Agency and were officially retired in 1968. The A-12 has long been cherished for its sleek and artistic design. Source: This Day in Aviation. Based on a thorough review of the Groom Lake evidence, we undoubtedly have compelling and hard evidence that points to the facts laid out by Plejaren in Contact Report 758. Regardless of whether the original photographs were burned and destroyed, that doesn't invalidate the fact that someone could have taken photographs of the original prints. In fact, we have evidence that strongly supports that scenario. In the nearly 4 years since the discovery of the photographs, no one has provided hard evidence to the contrary. Aside from that, we are only human beings who make mistakes as part of our own learning and evolution. If there is irrefutable evidence showing that the photos are something else, we will review that evidence and learn from any mistakes. In the meantime, there will be opinions, theories, and speculation for a long time, but none of that should matter if you examine the evidence and think for yourself. Your conclusions should always be your own. Weigh the evidence and the known facts, and let that be your guide. Wendelle Stevens was one of the best examples of a real and honest researcher. The way in which he was treated by the government and local authorities should help to clarify how serious he was about getting to the truth. We present our findings so that you can decide for yourself.
Billy Edward Albert Meyerships.
Drawings of the different beamship styles provided by Wendelle Stevens in UFO Contact from the Pleiades, Volume 1.
Wendelle kept very detailed records and descriptions of the Plejaren Federation beamship variations. Some of these ship designs were used throughout the Plejaren Federation. The Plejaren also received technological support and other advancements for their beamship technology from Askit's people in the Dal universe. Askit's people are from planet Timer in the Acon star system. They are members of the Plejaren Federation. Wendelle was a dedicated, skilled, and accomplished investigator. He cannot be compared with the researchers of the modern UFO community. Today we see hobbyists who collect photographs, but they have little ambition to thoroughly investigate or determine the authenticity of a case. Wendelle was meticulous and passionate about his research. His investigative reports provide great detail about the size and shape of the ships. They also include many details about the people involved and the environment in which they occurred. The Type 1 beamship was used in the early days of contact. Sim Yase demonstrated this ship variation when she left after meeting Billy for Contact 001. It was at the Frecht Nature Preserve near Hinwil, Switzerland, when Billy snapped the following photograph. Sometime in early 1975, the Type 1 beamship began to be replaced with newer models. We then begin to see the Type 2 and 3 variations along with the large beamship and the famous wedding cake UFO. On the left, an excerpt from UFO Contact from the Pleiades, Volume 1. On the right, the Type 1 beamship leaving the Frecht Nature Preserve after Contact 001. When examining the different beamship photos taken by Billy Meyer, the ships can sometimes have different appearances depending on where the sun is located and whether there are shadows or other energy or atmospheric conditions. The image at the Frecht Nature Preserve is a great example of this. The bottom of the ship looks black and the ship itself looks crinkled or rippled. It doesn't appear perfectly round and straight across the saucer area. The top cone area looks uneven and malformed. Our perceptions can sometimes play tricks on us, but the outside conditions and photo resolution can also contribute to these anomalies. I've seen many instances in the photo inventarium where the shape and colour of the ship looks completely different from what we know it looks like in reality. The same ship will appear white or silver in one photo and almost black or dark grey in another. The lighting and resolution play a large role in these distortions. During the replacement phase of the Type 1 variation, Sim Yase also demonstrated her new Type 2 variation ship. The two ship styles are very similar in appearance, but the Type 2 variation has a slightly more rounded cone area. Aside from the updates to propulsion and other principles, the appearance remains very similar.
Type 1 beamship and remote-controlled explorer craft mini scout.
In this next image, we can see the top of the Type 1 ship. The top appears a bit more boxy compared to the Type 2 variation.
Excerpt from UFO Contact from the Pleiades, Volume 1, page 436.
3 March 1975, 17 on Oberzell. Oh, a 7-meter manned reconnaissance ship in a smaller explorer craft. Also used in remote control mode with or without a pilot, in the single crew position aboard, pass overhead at low level, near the place where Meyer was working that afternoon.
Sim Yase's Type 2 beamship. Same ship, different appearance.
In this next series of images, we see Sim Yase's Type 2 beamship photographed in different areas at different times of the day. You'll notice the differences in colour and shape across the different photos. The ship itself is the same, but the many factors mentioned above make the ship appear different. After a long and thorough review of the images that Michael Horn found in Moab, Utah, it becomes irrefutably clear that Wendelle Stevens took these photos at Groom Lake in Nevada. When I say these photos, I obviously mean the older prints in the images. Before we get into that, there's something else to note. In Michael's images, the bottom of the ship is never fully revealed. Every photograph shows the UFO at an angle or tilt, but it's always the top of the ship that is showing. The bottom of the ship is never fully in view. As you might have guessed from the information above, the Type 1 beamship variation is the closest match for the craft in Wendelle's photographs. A replica of the ship can be placed over the ship from the photographs for a near-perfect match. We can't avoid the anomalies that are likely the result of image resolution or weather conditions, but you'll notice in the examples below with the tilted replica placed on top of the ship from the photograph, it's a perfect shape and fit. The replica is tilted forward to nearly the same degree as the UFO in the photograph. It has also been reduced in size to show the darkened ship behind it. There are only 2 images that show a section of the bottom of the ship. Those 2 images are shown below and include the tilted forward replica. It couldn't be helped, but the replica is tilted forward slightly more than the craft. The result is still remarkable. Even between these 2 photos, the UFO has a slightly different appearance and colour. The anomalies are presumably due to weather conditions, shadows, resolution, or the ink limitations of those times. From the article, Time Warped, Compelling Evidence of Time Travel.
The blue and purple hues in prints back then were enhanced, and the warmer tones were harder to reproduce, something to do with the inks that were available back then.
The fact that these photographs are images of older prints would also affect the true colours of the objects and surrounding area. Everything has to be considered because we have no idea what the lighting conditions were when these photos were snapped. The ship in Wendelle's images does not resemble a ship of the Earth foreigners. Billy himself produced an image of one of their ships and described them as being oval-shaped and glowing brightly. The foreigner ships are often referred to as being tic-tac or cigar-shaped craft. According to Pitar, the Earth foreigners are in no way as advanced as the Plejaren, and they do not possess Plejaren Federation technology.
Excerpt from Contact Report 850.
Then I want to ask you whether you still have the photo you took when you were in America with Bermuda on that night and photographed the foreign flying object behind the Capitol. Ta did say at the time that you should keep quiet about it, but now I think it is probably okay to talk about it.
You already asked me about the picture, which I then asked Bernadette about and got a stick from her on which the photo is recorded. Here is the stick, and I think I can safely show it openly now.
I also think so, as I said.
Here in the computer you can look at it. Just a moment, here it is. Unfortunately, I only had an instant camera, but I think I was able to take a good photo of the object even at night, and it was shining brightly just at the moment when I pressed the shutter release of the camera. Everything around was brightly illuminated, and then the object shot away in a flash and without a sound. To which group of foreigners it belonged, Bermuda also did not know.
Interesting, Bermuda told me about it, but we were unable to ascertain which foreigners were there. We were able to ascertain, however, that the Capitol security guards did not notice anything about the object, not even when it lit up brightly and illuminated everything for miles around.
Which I'm sure is a good thing, because I assume they would have idiotically and pointlessly fired away if they had seen the object or otherwise detected its presence. That's how boneheaded they really are in America. Because actually and truly thinking, those who are political bigots or like-minded people cannot do that. And I guess that includes the Capitol security forces as well as the military, who would rather kill and murder than think and protect lives.
Here again, in Contact 877, we have Billy describing the ships used by the Earth foreigners back in 1979.
Excerpt from Contact Report 877.
He only kept a few pictures that were unknown to me, or took them later with a camera that did not belong to me, because I had no knowledge of them and did not have them developed. These photos are also known and circulated today. But where he took them, I really do not know. But they were obviously taken over a sea, and they show a UFO and an American fighter plane that are completely unknown to me. But as I said, I do not know where these photos were taken, and I cannot ask Asket because she is not here, and I also do not know whether these photos were taken in her presence. And if I look closely at these photos, they do not show a beamship of Plejaren, but something foreign, which is probably a UFO of the foreigners, from whom you have always kept your distance. So I also do not deal with them. Although I have been able to observe their flying apparatus twice from the center, the first time in 1979, when Guido and I were at the concrete mixer and the floor for the media room was being concreted. The object we saw flying over the military's Bloodhound missile base was golden yellow, about 2 meters long, oval, as seen from us, and shining brightly. Our observation distance was about 600 meters or so. Such observations are also being made all over the world at the moment, as they have been for a long time, and also here in Switzerland. But this is officially kept quiet, as in this case here, when I was able to take the pictures of Sim Yase's beamship and the military fighter or jet fighter in the Maiwinkel. And that this was indeed the case is proven by this letter here, which was sent to me by post today of all days, along with many others, on the occasion of my birthday, but which I unfortunately cannot copy, but can only transcribe, which is certainly permitted if I do not mention the name and address.
Groom Lake, Nevada.
When looking at Google Earth or Google Maps, you might think that the entire area of Groom Lake is a light khaki or desert sand color. Again, we see a false perspective that plays tricks on the eyes. Below is an image from a trip I took to the area. Not far behind me stands a mountain range with the moon in the background. This image was taken just off of Route 375, also known as the Extraterrestrial Highway. It was in the general vicinity of the red bubble dot on the map. I travelled all over that entire area near Rachel, Nevada, and it looks mostly the same throughout. It's true that there are mountains all over the place, but there are also vast areas of flatlands in between. The mountains are separated by miles and miles of flatland. The Nevada region is part of the Great Basin Desert, which has a different composition from a dry and sandy desert.
From the U.S. National Park Service. Terrain. The Great Basin Desert is made up of hundreds of north-south mountain ranges separated by basins and valleys, which is known as a basin and range system. The desert also includes playas, or salty basins that formed when prehistoric lakes dried up. Vegetation. The Great Basin Desert's vegetation composition depends on site and disturbance history, and includes grassland, sagebrush steppe, salt desert shrubland, and juniper pinyon savanna and woodland. The valleys are dominated by sagebrush and shade scale, and at higher elevations, mountain big sagebrush is dominant. Climate. The Great Basin Desert's climate is affected by the Sierra Nevada and Cascade Mountains rain shadow. Prevailing winds from the Pacific Ocean rise over the Sierra. cooling and losing most of their moisture as rain. The Great Basin Desert receives an average of 7–12 inches of precipitation per year, with snow being common in the winter. Sources: National Park Service, the Great Basin, Wikipedia, Great Basin Desert.
The image below is one of the best images I have of the Groom Lake Mountains that sit directly to the left of the Groom Lake facilities and Homey Airport. We can see the large square building to the right of the mountains. This section of the mountain is shorter than the section farther to the left. You'll notice how it drops off sharply and ends right next to the Groom Lake facilities. This section is also sitting farther back and at an angle from the main part of the mountain range. There is a V-shaped cutout area between the shorter section and the taller section. The shorter section, after the cutout area, is taller at first and then it drops off as you hit the end of the mountain range. Situated in that cutout area are a few buildings and some roads. From Wendelle's position, this shorter section might have been slightly harder to see because it sits farther back and lower from the main part of the mountain. We can see the same large square building in both images below. We can also see the V-shaped cutout in the second image from Google Earth. If we examine Wendelle's photographs closely, we can see an obvious cut or break in the mountain. The section of the mountain that we can see after the break or cut is shorter. That section sits a little farther back and at an angle. The images below are somewhat blurry, but that doesn't affect your ability to see the clear break in the mountain. And you can see it plainly and easily in several of the photos below. Those mountains may look small, but in reality, they are huge with large peaks and drops. This is another case of perspective. The distance between the estimated flight path near the end of the runway extension and the base of those mountains is around 3 to 3.5 miles. Our best estimation is that Wendelle was somewhere around the edge of the dry lake bed beyond the runway extension. Groom Dry Lake would have been to his left. The mountains behind Groom Lake that are fainter in the photographs are at least 6 miles away at a minimum. See the image below for a better view of locations. Our next area of interest is the ground anomalies that occur throughout Wendelle's photographs. If you look at the area between the red lines on the images below, you can see the obvious difference in the composition of the terrain. The ground looks mucky or beat down. It resembles something you might see when the same area is travelled on over and over again, forming a new path. It stands out compared to the terrain in the surrounding area. This anomaly appears in every photograph that is taken from this perspective. Based on the best estimation of where Wendelle was positioned, the most logical explanation is that we are seeing some part of the runway extension. There are several areas in that same location that have a different type of composition compared to the ground in the surrounding areas. We can see it in the images below. The shot below was taken from a Cessna airplane that flew near the edge of the restricted airspace. The pilot was able to capture some amazing shots of the secret military base. The area can appear smaller than it really is. The reality is that Groom Lake is vast and spans for miles. The runway by itself is over 5 miles long. The dry lake bed is 3.7 miles long and 3 miles wide at its widest point. There are full-sized buildings and warehouses down there around the runway extension. In the enlarged image below, you can see some of the buildings by the runway extension. Here we see the difference in the terrain where Wendelle was most likely positioned.
Final thoughts.
I can no longer fathom any other conclusion. Wendelle Stevens set out on a life-changing journey with help from the extraterrestrial Asket. She sent the transmission into the future, thereby paralyzing space and time, during which they entered the year 1981 in the month of June. It was early in the morning on the 18th day that they entered the classified and top-secret military base with the secret designation of Area 51. While inside, Wendelle proceeded to take dozens of photographs and an untold number of films of the then top-secret stealth fighter jet, now known as the F-117 Nighthawk. Asket flew her beamship unhindered by earthly security and surveillance technology. Without any force or show of aggression, the extraterrestrial piloted her ship in friendly maneuvers around the base. All the while her dear friend Wendelle filled his photo album with treasured memories from their fantastic journey. That these photographs could have been taken somewhere other than Groom Lake in Nevada becomes less and less likely. Maybe I'm partial because I've looked at things under super magnification, but I don't see how that would even matter at this point. If the case consisted of only one piece of evidence, or maybe two, that might change the perspective. But when you have dozens of items that all point to the same conclusion, it's hard to understand the illogical theories. With that being said, I cannot agree that these photos, the original older prints, were taken in Pensacola, Florida. That was, in my opinion, an obvious decoy and an act of concealment to protect the life of a human being. In other words, it was an act of self-defense. With what we know and continue to learn about our government, it's not the least bit surprising that someone would take such precautions to avoid prison or worse. If I know Wendelle Stevens as well as I think I do from digging into his life, he would have made sure that all the evidence could be found. In his attention to detail and meticulousness, he would have covered all the bases. There are likely more pieces of the puzzle that we haven't found yet, but I suspect that everything will be found in the distant future. The full truth will one day be revealed.
At my present age of 86, I am convinced that the true habitat of man is space itself, that planets are nests where man is born into materiality and matures to leave the nest forever. Wendelle,